I don't know what's happening anymore. I ran the intro. Hi, heathens. Welcome. I'm technologically challenged. I thought I was doing it, but I didn't do it. Oh, and why can I hear an echo?
I
can
can't hear
hear
an
a
echo.
very. Okay, hold on. It's just me, I think. Hold on. I'm like Xing out of everything. This is what happens when my producer isn't here and I'm just left to my own devices. I can't do it, big mess. Okay, anyway, hello, heathens that are listening now that will listen later. I am coming to you from my living room for several reasons. One, I could not get the internet to work properly in my back room because God hates me. And also because it's Friday and I'm tired and I didn't want to wrestle with it. And so me and all of the dogs are greeting you from my front room in our effective pajamas. I'm in sweats. I am very lucky today to have the one and only Dan Conger with me. He has written a book called A Walk Through the Wilderness, and it's about his journey out of a cult and his time in a cult. So, hi, Dan. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, we did a sorry, just another dog making an appearance. We did a little pre-show interview so I could sort of get to know your story a little bit before I got your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not even going to try. Sorry, you're not going to try to pronounce what is happening. Please pronounce the name of the cult you were in, but we will get there when
Okay.
we get there. Can you give us just a little bit of background on sort of how you were brought up? This is lovely. Yeah, how you were brought up, and if you were religious, and sort of what led you into faith generally.
Yeah, so I was raised in Los Angeles area, and my father was a police officer. My mother was a homemaker, and we went to a very liberal church. Christians actually consider it a cult, but only for theological reasons, as I'm sure you and the listeners are aware. Evangelicals don't take psychological or sociological things into consideration when they comment on what is a cult or what is not. It's just theology. This cult, it was just a religious group. It was called Swedenborgianism, very liberal. The Bible's symbolic, it's not to be taken seriously. The important things are love your neighbor as you love yourself and do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So I was raised in that kind of very liberal environment. And then when I was 14, the family moved to the east side of the Sierra Nevada mountains in a small town called Bishop, which is near the ski town of Mammoth Lakes. And for 4 years, I lived there, and we went to a very liberal United Methodist church. So again, nothing fundy about it, nothing culty, just a liberal church. I participated in the church choir. I did other things, youth groups, etc. So I was raised in an environment of faith, essentially, and
Right.
I believed. But again, the Bible wasn't front and center. I heard Bible stories on Sundays and at youth group and whatnot, but it just wasn't a big deal. But then in my senior year of high school, so dating myself, that was 1995. I made a commitment on New Year's 95 to read the Bible for myself. Let's pick it up. Let's see what it actually says. I started reading, and for anyone who has read the early books of the Old Testament, it's a bit of a drag. Lots of genealogies, not a lot of fun
Begets
stuff
and
going
begats.
on. Oh my goodness, yeah. And lots of angry, wrathful God judgment stuff. If you're faithful in general, you get rewarded. If you're not, in general, you get punished. And then there's people like Job who just get punished because
Just for
reasons,
funsies.
just for fun. So then March 4th, 1995 rolls around, and I'm skiing at Mammoth Mountain. That week, the mountain had received 9 feet of snow in 2 days. So it was an environment ripe for avalanche. And Mammoth is also a volcanic mountain, so it regularly has very shallow depth earthquakes. I didn't know it, but at 12:38 p.m., I was standing on top of Dave's Run at Mammoth, and there was one such earthquake. I also didn't know it, but what I was standing on was the overhanging frozen wave of a cornice, and it collapsed underneath me, and I was swept away in an avalanche.
Jesus.
And having just read or been reading all of those judgments of God in the Old Testament, I became convinced that God was judging me and that he was telling me I need to change some things about my life. I wasn't a bad kid. Everybody respected me. I was a dork, card carrying dork. And
Relatable. Yeah.
yeah, right.
Still am.
Yeah. So it really changed my perspective. I finished my senior year and decided where to go to college. I would go to Humboldt State in extreme northwestern California on the Redwood Coast.
I'm familiar.
Yep. I chose it only because it's a small town near mountains, because I had fallen in love with the mountains and I wanted to be able to go to the mountains. Shortly after arriving, I actually finished reading the Bible from beginning to end. I finished the book of Revelation. And then I was looking for a Christian group to join. I wasn't looking to become, crazy about it, but I had this fear that was put in me by my experience with the avalanche that
the Bible has that effect on people, making them a little.
It does. It's the fear of God, if you will. And in that spirit of fear, I was looking for a group that was going to keep me on the straight and narrow so that I wouldn't have to face that kind of judgment again,
right,
in my thinking, right? I'm 18. What do I know? I'm as naive and idealistic as it gets. But I think I know everything because I've read the whole Bible.
And that's all there is to know.
That's right. So I find this group that has a Bible study, and I start going. And immediately I notice everybody's super serious about this. People are taking notes during the Bible study. They're amening and praise the Lording and all those things. And I'm listening and I'm really surprised. So I go up to the person leading the Bible study afterwards, and we talk for probably 30 minutes after the Bible study. And I'm, of course, quizzing him because I know everything and I want to see if he's got his theology straight. And I continue going to meetings and I continue getting sucked in because every single person is absolutely serious about this. Every other group I had ever been to for youth group, there's people flirting and dating and everything, but these people were hands off, hands to themselves, focused on, their religious duties. Very small group. The community group probably had 30 people or so, including families and children.
Okay.
And I continue reading the Bible. When I finished Revelation, I picked up a King James Bible, and I started reading again in the King James. So I just kept reading. And I just became more and more and more fundamentalist in my thinking as I went. And the cult group was reinforcing this by warning me about the dangers of being involved with, friends at the university, family, other Christian groups. You see, they have light, but they don't have the same light that we do. So you need to be careful because they can lead you astray.
Yeah. That was always a really interesting thing to me. Sorry to interrupt, but
no worries.
Even growing up evangelical, I call it a cult, but it's definitely not a cult in the same way that what you're describing is. Mm-hmm. But how there was this message of Lucifer was the angel of light. So you can have light and not sort of be right with God or not be on the path you're supposed to, or you can be deceptive or you can be being deceived. And I found that Christianity, especially the evangelical version of it, is rife with those things, right? You're supposed to, the heart is deceitful above all things. And exactly. But also, so it's this whole thing of how are you supposed to know what's actually true?
Right.
And you can't, is what I found. But anywho, no. Would you mind sort of speaking to why you think, or if it was maybe just the cult, but why you think that reading through the King James Version again, or for the first time, I guess, you became more fundamentalist? Do you think it had to do with just external forces, or was it something else?
It's a combination of things. One, there's the external influence of the cult group, but two, the language of the King James is different. My first read through was in the New International Version. And of course, the New International they try to modernize and they try to gentrify a lot of the bad stuff in the Old Testament. They use different language, but the King James is just raw. It just something about the language makes it more emphatic, at least in my experience. And then you have the external influence of all these people that I'm meeting that have, it seems like from the outside, their families are put together, their children are super obedient, and why they were super obedient would become clear later, and that's very important.
I feel like I have a guess.
Yeah, three guesses. No, one guess. Yeah. So there's this environment, and then I learned that one of the reasons that I'm not seeing any kind of relationships is because they have this rule of no dating. You're not allowed to date. You wait until God has shown you who he wants you to marry, and then under supervision, you spend time and you get married. And so strangely enough, that no dating rule is part of what convinced me to throw myself into the cult, because I thought, well, if I'm not dating, there's no opportunity for sin here, because I'll never have the opportunity, right? I won't be in a relationship. So how can I possibly? So I really threw myself into it, and continuing to read the King James and hear the teaching and the dangers of other groups and cherish the light. There's this analogy in the Old Testament, especially, of having a city on a hill, because if you're up on the hill, you can protect yourself from the dangers down in the valleys around you. And the cult group called itself, in many respects, the city on the hill. I'll refer to it as the assemblies, because that's what people referred to it as, the assemblies. The founder's name was a Greek man named George Giftakis. He was raised in Southern California, and he became a part of the Brethren movements in Southern California as a young man, and became deeply involved. And during the Jesus movement of the 70s, he branched out into his own version of the Brethren. And for anybody who's familiar with the Plymouth Brethren or the Open Brethren, theologians like J.N. Darby, it's a very intense group. And he took their intensity and took it to a whole nother level.
Turned it to 11.
Yeah, exactly. He cranked it all the way up. So I ended up being invited to live in one of the communal homes that was run by one of the leading brothers. And so I'm living with one of the leaders and his family. And there are two other...
Sorry, can I interrupt to ask how, what was your first interaction with this group? Did you go to a meeting? Did they find you sort of on a corner? Not like you're working on a corner, but how they evangelize on a corner. Sorry.
Right.
Sometimes things come out of my mouth that should.
Yeah. I was sitting there with a little bag begging for food. So I was finishing dinner at the dorm dining room, and there was a poster board. Back in the 90s, there's no iPhones. There's none of this electronic stuff we have today existed. My computer was an old Macintosh SE, and if you know what that was a box about this big with a little black and white screen, and that was it. So I see the poster for this Bible study, and it just stands out to me for some reason, something about the design. The next week, I'm walking across campus, and they're standing at their little literature table, and they have a big billboard there, and it has the same design as the little poster that I found. And I realize, this is the group. So I have a conversation with the guy, talk to him for a minute, and realize, okay, I'll go check out their Bible study. There were plenty of other Bible studies on campus to go to, plenty of, Campus Crusade for Christ. I'm sure you're familiar with that. They're active on the campus. So, but I just...
What about the Connectly brothers? Were they out there? I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Not that I know of. That's yeah, but everybody else was there.
Right.
But so I go to the Bible study, and so that was my introduction to them. And I was just hook, line, and sinker once I realized they were so serious about, quote, pleasing God. And I thought that was my secret to escaping future judgments like the one that I had experienced in the avalanche.
Right. When the avalanche happened, were you seriously injured? Was it just really scary?
Yeah. So I still have back problems today. I'm 45 now. It happened when I was 18, and my back still, I have to be careful about how I do certain things. If I put on my socks and twist in the wrong way, it'll go out. It's out.
Yikes.
So I still have to be careful. I wasn't seriously injured, though, in the sense that I got up and
Yeah.
walked away from it, right?
Seriously is a very like relative term.
It's very much so.
Yeah,
But I do have this chronic back problem that, I'll just have to live with as a result of it.
right. That's no fun at all. Sorry. So I interrupted you and you were saying that you found this group that you thought that was very serious about pleasing God, and you thought that this would be like a safeguard for you so that
Exactly.
you can experience another judgment. This is totally off the cuff. And feel free to like not answer. But I'm always curious just because of the way I grew up and sort of the way that like childhood trauma and like religious trauma interacted to like create religious scrupulosity and other mental health issues. If like if there was anything like did you have very authoritarian parents, or was there
No.
anything that would have been like sort of this stand-in for like I'm going to be
Mm-mm.
punished really harshly, or was just you read the Bible and for some reason that sort of stuck in your brain?
It just it was a classic correlation, but no causation of I was happened to be in the Old Testament reading about all these judgments. Korah, if you're familiar with the story in Exodus, or I can't remember exactly which book, but Korah and his followers rebel against Moses. The earth opens up and swallows them.
Right.
Okay. So I'm reading that stuff, and then I get caught in the avalanche. And
Totally.
it just, my brain the pattern seeking brain
Yep.
just made the connection.
Yep, that makes sense.
My
Yeah.
I mentioned my dad was a cop, but he was an anti-cop. He was very progressive, always voted Democrat.
Hey,
He
shout out.
always fought for reform in his department. He told me
I'm
a
sure he
story
was very
once.
popular.
No, he wasn't, and that's the thing. He went out for captain multiple times and was
Yeah.
never promoted to that level. And I firmly believe, and I think he would agree, that it was politics.
Yeah. I'm
During
very
one
much
or
one of those people that like I can't stand the police and I will
I've
argue,
read that.
yeah, sorry, like to tell folks like defund them. Living somewhere where cops don't do jack shit for anyone really, like but at the same time, like I have a lot of respect for people that are in the institution that are actively fighting to make it
Right.
better or to change or whatever. So I do like to make that caveat because I know a lot of times I'm like, yeah, fuck 12. And I mean it. But like but also like for those people that are working in the force and trying to make it better, like I personally don't think reform will work, but like I would much rather have people in the force trying to make it better than
Mhm.
not. So like shout out to your dad.
Yeah, it's an example of that is he told me about this arrest when he was a sergeant, where later the guy was rightfully convicted. It was a violent crime, but they had him cuffed and under control on the ground. And one of the other sergeants grabbed his baton and went to make a baton strike on a guy that was under control. He was still struggling, but he was
Sure.
under control. My dad stuck his arm out and took the baton
Oh,
shot on his own arm because he's like, this, it's not justified. He reported the other sergeant. My dad was a sergeant at that time too, so he
yeah.
couldn't discipline him, but he reported it. But that's just one example of he tried to make a difference. But I would agree with you, and I think he would too, that
Yeah.
the policing system in America is broken and it
Yeah.
needs a
I don't
major overhaul.
so I know that this isn't like the topic of our show.
It's okay, we can
Sorry. Uh Also like sorry, this is a weird question. Is your dad still around?
Yeah, he's retired. He and my mom live in the same house that on the Eastern Sierra in Bishop,
Well,
California.
fist bump him for me sometime. Um, it, I think the thing that I always struggle with is like people, and I've said it before too, right? For those that have followed me for a little bit, like I wrote my college thesis I was an econ major on the statistical correlation between early childhood education and
Hmm.
later in life incarceration. And so I've read a lot about policing and about policy and about all these things. What I what I came to understand on the other side of sort of all of this research and ongoing research, because it's something I care a lot about, um, is that I don't actually think the system is broken. I think it's working exactly how it was originally
Yeah,
designed. But the
I
way
think I
it
would
was
agree with you.
originally designed was to protect wealthy white landowners
Exactly.
against
Yes.
people of color. So like I totally, and this is not me trying to correct you in any way. I just like I think a lot of people feel the same, like the system is broken, and I totally get that sentiment. but like I try to reframe for people that it's not so much that it's broken, it's that it was designed to do this and we've just evolved, or we'd like to think we evolved past that sort of we need someone to protect wealthy white people against, the plebes. Anyway, if anyone is interested in that, I did an interview with Alex Vitale, who wrote The End of Policing, and that's on my channel, and you can go listen to him talk about all of it. But this is not that show. This is about you and your experience. Sorry.
Well, I think what we've learned recently about what was going on in, for example, Baltimore with the systemic, they deliberately did not patrol white neighborhoods, and people assigned to those neighborhoods with intent went. He doesn't like that either. I lost your audio.
I'm going to mute myself. Okay, can you hear me?
There we go. I can.
Sorry. I muted myself very quickly because I think the mail came, and so my dogs were like losing their ever-loving minds. Stella, come here. Yeah, they have a lot of problems. Sorry. Yes, you were talking about Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, deliberately leaving white neighborhoods to patrol majority black ones. I mean, obviously, the system supporting that. Yeah, I think reform is difficult and obviously necessary. My dad, one of the things he always pushed back on is we need to stop with the militarized training and do more psychological training. Because, oftentimes you show up and all you see is someone with a weapon, say, and you don't know if this person is autistic or if they have some other you don't know.
Right.
But if you had appropriate training in psychology, maybe the situation would be a little bit different in the way it played out.
Right.
But yeah, I mean obviously that's a big topic.
That's something that I've sort of been talking about forever, is that like and this is something Alex and I talked about, but like we criminalize everything we don't want to deal with effectively. Like as a community, we're like, well, I don't know how to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. So we're going to send it to the police. But when you do that, right, the police's role in society is not to prevent crime. It is just to sort of figure it out on the back end. And when you assign all of this to them that they have no training in, especially when the barrier to entry for being a police officer is, like, to be honest, pretty damn low.
Pretty low.
This is what you get. Like, it's what you get, right? Because you say, hey, you don't need a degree. Not that a degree is everything. It's not. But, like, you don't need a degree. You just need to get through the academy. And, like, what happens exactly is you get a lot of people who, unfortunately, have somewhat of a power trip because they either feel like they didn't have any in their before times, or people that are ex-military that can't be in the military anymore, and so they sort of still want that power status control, but they are not at war, or they're not supposed to be anyway. Okay, sorry. I'm going to stop because otherwise I'm going to jump into like crime and punishment. We're going to talk about policy and I could talk about it all day. However, I will say this. I just did an interview with Dr. Jamar Tisby, and we talk quite a bit about stuff like this. It's not out yet, but when it is, y'all should watch. All right, back to your story. Yeah. Sorry.
Where were we? No, it's so we were talking about me getting more involved. So I embraced the no dating thing. So we're back to the no dating thing. I embraced that and move into the home, and I'm living under supervision. The leader is essentially evaluating how I spend my time, how I spend my money, phone calls.
Normal.
Yeah, totally normal behavior, right? And all the while, we're getting this very intensive biblical instruction on, quote, biblical manhood, the role of women, Of course, I was a huge trans/homophobe during this whole period, which of all the things that I regret, that is what I regret the most deeply, is that.
Relatable.
Yeah. So I'm getting involved in all of this. And then what they do is there's not a leader in the city. So they believe not in having a pastor or a leader. So in Arcata, California, there were 3 leading brothers. Of course, women
Arcata.
not allowed.
No.
Yeah.
Women bad.
Women, you sit there, you literally, if we're praying or worshiping, you put a covering on your head, you're quiet, you're allowed to pray, you're allowed to worship, but you're not allowed to preach. Yeah, you sing when everyone sings. You can't have any leadership position whatsoever if you're female. So all of the training for women is just how to be submissive.
It's how to be quiet.
How to let the brothers lead, how to, even when you know they're making a mistake. They would say this, even when a wife knows her husband is making a mistake, her job is to shut the fuck up and let him make that mistake and trust God to make it right.
Yeah,
Whatever
trust
the hell
God,
that
meaning
means.
clean it up when everything
Exactly.
goes to shit.
Clean
That's what that means.
Yes, when it all falls apart. And one of the only things I never fully bought into was the misogyny. I remember one time we had gone out preaching every Sunday. You get in your car and you go door knocking. We were door knocking people. You go preach on a street corner, you do whatever. So I was particularly tired that Sunday because we're going to worship and then we have Sunday afternoon meeting and then you do something at the house. And then of course you go to school or work on Monday. Tuesday night prayer meeting, school or work on Wednesday, Thursday night Bible study, Friday night Bible study, Saturday morning meeting, Saturday, we're just busy. So one particular Sunday, I'm tired.
If you stay busy, you don't have any time to think.
And in the mind of the leader, you don't have any time to sin if you're too busy to sin.
Listen, there's always time to sin.
Yeah. So I get sent out on witnessing, door knocking one Sunday, and I asked the sister that was sent with me, please drive the car. I'm very tired. I don't think I should drive. I get back, and one of the brothers pulls me aside, and he says, "Brother, you let a sister drive your car." And I'm like, "What? What? You want me to fall asleep and have a car accident?"
Yeah, I'll die. That's preferable.
And I told him, if a woman driving your car is a threat to you, I told him, the problem's not the woman. And boy, did I get a tongue lashing for that. So this continues and I continue getting involved. And at a certain point, the student who was at Humboldt State leading the campus group graduated and moved on. And I was made the new leader of the campus group. So I started getting even more involved. I was at the little book table we had on the campus quad 9 hours a week. You can imagine what spending all that time there did to my study time and my grades. I graduated with a very low GPA. And on my senior year there, my last year, I was voted one of the 3 most recognizable people on the campus by the campus newspaper because I was always there at the space where virtually everyone passes by to go to and from the cafeteria or class or whatever. And, I was deeply, deeply involved. And come my time to graduation, you can do one of 2 things. You can either go on to what they call the campus work, which is essentially leadership training. The assemblies were founded in Fullerton, California, down in Orange County. And so you would either upon graduation, choose to go down to Fullerton for very intensive leadership training to become a campus worker, where they're essentially training you. When you're done, at some point, you're going to go to a new city where there's no cult presence. You're going to start a Bible study on a college campus.
No, thank
because
you.
College students are very naive and idealistic and easy to convince to join your movement.
Yeah.
And you're going to start a new assembly group in this city, starting on the college campus. The other option you have upon graduating is pursue your career and see if the leadership will allow you to get married. Because, of course, you have to have their permission to get married. And during this time, the leaders were talking to me about one particular sister that they thought would be a good match for me, and they were trying to pair us up. in the assembly, there were essentially three kinds of marriage. There were normal, healthy marriages where people who not in the cult might have met each other and fallen in love and had a great relationship. Normal, healthy marriages. There were
Totally
fishbowl
normal,
marriages, which is you have a very small number of people that you can choose to be a spouse. So you choose someone that you would never otherwise choose because you have very limited options. You're in this tiny fishbowl.
Right.
Arranged marriages were absolutely a thing, and I would challenge any former assembly member to prove me wrong. And normally, almost without exception, it was a woman being pressured intensively to marry a man that wanted her. And so,
I'm shocked.
yeah, of
I'm
course, that's
shocked,
the
I
way it
say.
works in a heavily patriarchal group like that. I hear my son out there.
Hi, friend.
Yeah. So they're training me, and I end up going to the campus ministry. And if you go to the campus work in Fullerton, you're not allowed to get married that year. So for a year, I wasn't getting married. I went to this campus ministry. And while I was there in Fullerton, the first rumors of scandal began to kind of circulate through the group.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Before we get into the like Jerry Falwell of it all. Also, if y'all haven't watched that documentary on Hulu about Jerry Falwell, God forbid, please do it. Excellent. Anyway, I would like to talk a little bit about the tactics that they use to retain people in the cult. And yes, I'm so glad you just cracked open another beer. Love it. So I guess like you sort of gave a schedule, and I think that's definitely one tactic. But I'm curious, like, in what ways they manage to keep you isolated, or in which ways they manage to keep you sort of just, yeah, I guess the tactics they use to indoctrinate you and continually indoctrinate you.
So remember that my time of involvement started in September 1995
Okay.
and ended in January 2004. So for much of that time, the internet was in its infancy.
Right. Yes.
Computers, everyone having a computer in their home wasn't even really a thing when I first started in the group. They could control TVs. No one was allowed to have a TV, and a leader would come by to see if you had a TV in your home. So they could control that source of information.
So did y'all live in community? Did y'all live in one house? What was that like?
So there were a number of different training homes in any different city. In Arcata, there were 5 training homes. So young single people would be strongly encouraged, live in a training home. And you're either, typically if you're male, you're living with a leader, so you can be trained how to be a man because the leaders are all men.
How not to watch porn. Got it.
Well,
Sorry.
And remember, back in the 90s, the internet was not what it is today. It just wasn't. So the men would be considered encouraged to live with one of the leaders, and the women would be encouraged to live in a sister's
underground
home. Yeah.
Sorry.
For all intents and purposes, yes. Just shut up, don't say anything, obey me. Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, so you're in a home. So you go to school or work or both, depending on what you're doing. And so you have there's no way you can avoid being exposed to the world when you're at work or at school or whatever. You're going to hear things, you're going to see things, but then you're going to come back to your city on the hill, which is what I call it repeatedly in the book. And this is your place of sanctuary. This is your place of safety. And because of my experience with the avalanche, I willingly threw myself hook, line, and sinker into that echo chamber because I wanted to be safe.
Yeah.
And so that's how they controlled everything. You're in a home. You're meeting with leadership on a regular basis. Even if you're not in a home, then even though it wasn't the quiet thing was never said out loud, but if you weren't really in a home, it was quite clear that you were not one of the quote favorites of the leadership.
Right.
There was one guy in particular in Arcata who just refused. He was never going to live in a home. He was always going to be on his own. But he, for whatever reason, stayed in the assembly too. But so there were all those ways where even though you had to go out into the world, you came back to your place where the indoctrination just flowed like a river all the
Yeah.
time.
It's
And
like consistent like decompression or something.
correct. And no TV, right? So you're not getting TV. The internet's not really developing. And a
Right.
part of the development of the rumors that we'll get to in a little bit was because the internet had started evolving and it was more available. And now there was not just a computer in a home by the year 2000. There were typically multiple computers in a home, right? Everyone who was a
Right.
college student living in the home had their own computer. The family had a computer. And now there's this source of information that they could not control, nor did they even have the first idea of how to control it.
Right. So
And
tell
that,
me, if you don't mind, like, what was it like when you first heard rumblings?
okay, so I was in Fullerton doing my leadership training, and the first rumors that were being posted on a website about the founder's eldest son, whose name was David. He's no longer with us. He passed some years ago. He was a type 1 diabetic. But as a part of his regimen to handle his diabetes, he worked out heavily. The man was built. He was ripped head to toe.
Mhm.
And rumors started coming out that he was committing felony level spousal and child abuse, and that the leader of the group, George, his father, was helping him cover it up.
I can't believe it.
Yeah, I know, shocking, right? In a
Yeah,
misogynistic group like that, there
it's
were men who
wild.
were abusive to their wives and children, and child abuse was rampant. If you
What?
get a plastic coat hanger and you cut the straight bottom part out, you get a little plastic rod. That's what they beat their children with.
Mhm.
So if you want to know what that feels like, take one and smack your arm with it.
Oh.
It hurts like hell.
Mhm.
Okay. And so every morning I would wake up in the training home and you would hear crying, 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 crying as they're getting them ready for school, because multiple spankings per day with a rod of some kind was the standard practice. Parents' meetings often included the subject, how to hide the bruises you inflict on your children from the public so that CPS doesn't come and take your abused children away from you.
Yeah. I used to get open hand slapped by my 6 foot, 200 something pound dad and by my mom, on top of like belt lashings where it was like, go get the belt. So, like, not exactly the same, but like corporal punishment was a very real thing, also, how I
Hmm.
grew up. Um, and I don't personally want children, but I'll tell you this, if I ever have them, I will not be laying a hand on them.
Right.
Like, because that shit does a lot of damage. It's done a lot of damage to
Big
me. It's
time.
done a lot of damage to a lot
Yeah.
of people. And if you were beat as a kid growing up, I mean, I was picked up by one arm and hit, like I punched in the leg. Like I was a fucking child, y'all. Like,
Yeah.
and I was not a big child. Not that it matters if you're a child, but like I was scrawny up until I hit puberty. So like I was this tiny thing. Um, and the church pushed this narrative of
Yeah.
spare the rod, spoil the child.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yep. Every problem in modern society is because
We
children
don't
just
beat the
don't get
out of
spanked
children.
anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
And coming from a home where I can probably count on one hand the number of times I was very softly spanked through my clothes, it was a night and day experience for me, just seeing it. And I do remember in the assembly thinking to myself, I'm going to do something different if and when I have children. I don't think I can do this to my children. Um,
I don't get it.
I
Like, I
don't either.
sincerely
I
don't
just
get
don't.
it. Like, even as an
No.
adult now who has had the urge to hit a lot of people when they've pissed
Hmm.
them off, partially because of how I was raised, but just like generally, if you get angry enough, you're like, I want to hit this person and never doing it. Like,
Right.
how you could see a small child and think that like this level of rage and violence is
Yep.
appropriate repeatedly? No, couldn't be
A
me.
a baby who is just now learning to stand up for the first time getting hit like that.
God,
Yeah. But David took that to an altogether different level.
I'm
He
sure he's in heaven.
really beat, oh yes, he really beat his wife and children. And so that starts coming out. And when I heard the rumors and they really began growing, the internet could not be controlled. And that, in my opinion, that's what brought the assembly down. It was the internet. It just could not be. It was a source of information that they had no idea how to control. And I asked Tim Giftakis, who's George's other son. George had two sons, Tim and David. And I was assigned to work with Tim at UCLA on that campus while I was down there for the leadership training. And one day on the drive to UCLA, LA traffic is unspeakably terrible. So we're in traffic. And I asked him about it. I said, this is, people are really talking about this and it's a problem and I want to know what's going on. And he said, it's a family matter. And I do think my brother has hit his wife a couple of times, but we are dealing with it. Don't talk about it. Tell everyone you hear talking about it. Don't talk about it and let it go. We're handling it. But that was a bridge too far for me. And so I didn't verbalize it a lot, but my first seeds of doubt began germinating during that year when I was being trained to be a leader in the group, which is kind of an irony if,
It is wild to me, sorry, that anybody,
okay.
like any man could hear, yeah, my brother, I'm sure, has hit his wife a couple of times, but like, don't worry, it's fine. We're dealing with it. Like, unless the way you are dealing with it is calling the police and getting her to a safe place,
yes.
then you're not dealing with it. You're covering up for an abuser and
Yes.
like, stay the fuck away from me forever. Like,
and when you add to the fact that this was a very strong, athletic, muscular guy, the horror just magnifies.
yeah.
And people kept talking about it, and it was the problem that would not go away. And so I kind of let it go at that point, but I was thinking about it. I didn't talk to Tim about it again, but I kept thinking about it. And the more I heard people talking about it and the stories that they were relating, I kept thinking to myself, there's some truth to this. There has to be. And the fact that it appeared, not only was it being reported, but other people in leadership, other leaders were telling George, hey, this is happening. We are seeing this happen. It is happening. You have to do something. And he's not doing anything. So then I go back to Arcata after my year, and the assembly has picked someone for me. Essentially, it was a fishbowl marriage. So I get engaged, never dating, just get engaged to someone who I never would have chosen to marry otherwise. And after we get engaged, the shit hits the fan. And it finally becomes so clear that this conspiracy to keep the abuse secret, it becomes so clear that it's fact. Something has to be done.
Right.
And so in December of 2002, the leadership of the Fullerton Assembly disciplines George Giftakis, removes him from leadership. He's no longer allowed to preach or make decisions. They
George
remove
is the
his son.
Father, right?
George is the father.
Okay.
They also remove David from leadership.
Okay.
And he's off to the side, but he's still a member. He hasn't been excommunicated.
Right.
If you
like, what is happening with his wife?
She's gone at this point. His kids and his wife are gone. They have flown the coop. They're gone.
Well, that's good.
It's being pitched as they're rebellious. They're not obeying the Lord.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
Oh, John MacArthur, is that you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So this is all happening, and there's a schism that develops. There are a few people who refuse to accept that George has any culpability. This is the leader of the group, the international leader. They refuse to accept. You see, because God spoke to us through that man, and God does not use men like that to speak.
Oh,
so he couldn't have been involved.
Is that you, King David, the fucking rapist?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And King Solomon, Abraham, all of the patriarchs. So So what I'm going to say is going to sound wrong at first, but I'm going to clarify it. So then something comes out that in the assembly is even worse than the spousal and child abuse. It then comes out that for 30 years, for the entire duration of the assembly, the founder of the group, George Giftakis, had been committing adultery with women sometimes 50 years younger than himself throughout the tenure of the assembly. This comes out in January, February 2003.
I'm shocked.
That set off a neutron bomb in the group. And it was a year before internationally gone. It's no longer a thing. And the reason I say that what I said is going to sound wrong is because, in my opinion, the spousal abuse and the covering it up is an order of magnitude worse than having a shag with somebody. But for fundy evangelicals, as I'm sure you're aware, the sexual sin is the paramount, the worst thing you can do. It is the single worst thing ever. And so, the fact that he was beating the shit out of his wife and children and that George was covering it up, okay, that's a problem, but whatever.
I cannot imagine like having a friend, male or female, that I know is physically harming their
Right.
partner regularly and severely and being like, you know what I'm gonna do? Cover it up.
Yeah, I can't either. And
y'all cook meth in your kitchen? Like, what the fuck? Like,
yeah, and that didn't destroy the assembly. The adultery destroyed the assembly. Once that came out, that was a bridge too far for people. And that is what really pushed things over the edge. And for me, that was the beginning of my journey towards my position now as an atheist. Is I had this belief that if you read the book of Acts, there are people that travel with Paul who their sole purpose is to support his ministry. They're there to support him. And in the assemblies, we called those people workers. And I believed that I had been called to be a worker to support Brother George.
Oh, Brother George.
Yes, Brother George. He was not, he would be adamant. He's not reverend or blah, 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 blah. He's brother. Brother George. And so knowing in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, it specifically says that you are to have nothing to do with a sexually perverse person. Don't even sit down and eat with this person. Cast them out from your midst. And so as a fundy evangelical, I learned that he's been doing this for 30 years. And I think to myself, I can't have been called by God to support this man. There was this moment of cognitive dissonance where I believed so strongly that I had been called, but it's not possible. I can't have.
Right.
So starting in, say, February, March 2003, I began questioning everything that I believed. It was a slow, years-long process. But
I like it.
Slong,
slow,
yes.
long. Yeah,
Slow,
I can
long,
relate.
slong.
I can relate.
So, but while everything's falling apart in early 2003, I ended up getting married in April 2003 to a woman that I never would have married outside of the cult.
Vibes.
And so now there's this extra wrinkle of, okay, so I'm a husband and a new husband at that. A young man, I'm 24-ish, 25 maybe at the time.
I cannot imagine being married at 24.
Yeah, well, and in hindsight, I can recognize as a much older person that was a huge mistake for me.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, I understand. I just was thinking of me at 24 and like, good God.
No.
Yeah.
So all my whole world is literally upside down, but I'm still going forward. The assembly in Arcata is still meeting and I'm still working to support it.
Yeah. It's like the sunk cost fallacy where you're like, well, I'm in this far.
I'm going to keep going, right? Yeah. So, but then January 2004 comes along and I just can't do it anymore. And there's a handful of people left. It was me and one of the founding member of the Arcata Assembly and one or two other families that are still meeting. And I tell them, I can't, I'm moving on. It's time to be done. And then the rest of them looked at each other in that meeting and they said, well, all right, I guess we're done. And that was the end of the Arcata Assembly. And so I moved through various churches. There was a First Baptist church in Arcata that I attended for a long time. But all the while I'm questioning, why do I believe this? Why do I believe that?
Yeah.
Why do I believe the other?
Out of curiosity, like outside of this sort of like scandal that happened within your group, like
Mhm.
what was the first biblical inconsistency or like what was the first thing that you were like I cannot reconcile this that wasn't like this group that I belong to is telling me X
Mhm.
versus like I actually can't reconcile this with like my own like with the Bible or with my own sort of like, internal value system outside
Mhm.
of misogyny. I'm looking for more like
Right.
I guess biblical based things.
Evolutionary biology. I had been raised in a liberal science-based home, and before being involved in the assembly, I embraced old earth, all things science,
Right.
etc. But during the assembly, I never left my belief that the earth was old because I love geology. I'm a huge geology nut. And so there's no way you could have convinced me that the earth was young. But I did abandon evolution. And so that was the first thing that I was like, okay, I know evolution happens. I know it
Right.
does. And then from a social standpoint, the next thing to go was my trans and homophobia. Um, during right before the scandals came out, there's a small newspaper in Humboldt County called the North County Journal. They published a story about a man who, in his 50s, he identified as a man. He wasn't trans, but he discovered in his 50s that he was born intersex.
Hmm.
And so they published his story about how he had always felt he identified as a man, but he always felt that he was different from the other men. He could not shake this feeling that somehow he was different. And when he discovered that when he was born, he was intersex, and this is still practice in the United States, by the way, his parents were given the option to assign the gender to him, and they assigned male.
Of course they did.
Of course they did. And he discovered this in his 50s, and it made his whole it was like a tectonic shift in his thinking. It made his whole world make sense. And I was still heavily involved in the assembly when I read that article. But then in 2003 and 2004, as I'm leaving and rethinking, I remember this article, and I
Right.
think to myself, my whole phobia of homosexuality and trans people has to go. It's so obvious that you're born this way. You are born this way. It's a matter of birth. You love who you love. And who am I to tell somebody that they can't love someone else?
Yeah, I can relate because growing up in the church, in the evangelical church, all I heard was how the LGBTQ community was a result of like some like generational abuse,
Right.
or it was a result of like like it just like it wasn't natural, right? Like they found these like
Hmm.
really weird ways to like rationalize it, and I always remember thinking like that doesn't make any fucking sense. Like
No.
that doesn't make any sense, and also like two things. Love y'all. But if I could choose, yeah, would not be attracted to men. That's all I'm gonna say. Se- second, like for trans folks, at least from the people I know, and it makes your life exponentially more difficult. And it makes you a target and you get so much vitriol and so much
Yeah.
hate. And
Why
like
would
the
you choose
only
that?
reason that you would choose that is because you don't have another choice because that's who you
Who you
are.
are. Yeah.
And so like this idea to be honest is one of the things that I was just like I know this is what y'all are telling me, but like how do you believe this? How do you really believe this? Like cuz nothing it's like a woman saying she was sexually assaulted. Like you don't win anything.
No.
Nothing good comes from it, right? Like
In fact, you're going to be blamed for it in most cases.
exactly. So it's like, why would you even? Yeah. Anyway, it's not exactly like that, but it's similar in the way it's like you don't get anything good from it. It's
Right.
just you just get trouble. But it's either who you are or it is what happened to you, and like that is your truth. But anyway, sorry.
No, and so that was like those were the first two things to go. And my ex-wife was a little bit slower in coming along on all those things, which is probably part of what started our early problems. But mostly it was we just should not have been together to begin with.
Yeah.
So in 2004, we then moved from Humboldt County to San Leandro, California, and we're living in
where I grew
your
up.
stomping grounds, right? And so we're living there for a few years, and our marriage just starts falling apart. There's no passion, there's no attraction, there's no, it slowly starts falling apart. We begin seeking counseling. And, my current wife and I are of the opinion that we should treat our mental health the exact same way as we treat our physical health.
Yep.
If you're a good steward of your physical health, you go in for an annual physical exam every year, and you're hoping you will hear, you're healthy, maybe work on a couple of things, but you're healthy, keep on going.
Right.
The same should be true for our psychology, for our emotional state. At a minimum, I would assert that we should all be going in for an annual therapeutic, and you're hoping to hear, you're in great shape, you're doing great, keep on going. Maybe you need more than that. Maybe you need, I don't know, but we should be treating our.
I go in once a week for therapy, and I'm going to tell you what she says.
My wife and I do it quarterly at this point.
Interesting. No. No.
Yeah.
Good.
So we go to a therapist, my ex-wife and I, and in that therapy session, it was a Christian therapist, but she pitches the question to us the first time, would you have gotten married had you not been in this group?
No.
And that was, for both of us, that was a game-changing question. It was this, no, we wouldn't have, but we are married, so what do we do? And so we kept on. And about a year later, we started seeing a secular therapist. And he was the first one who said, have you considered that it might be best for both of you if you divorced? What? And that was, again, another quantum shift in our thinking. Right. Yeah. And so divorcing is what we ended up doing. I'm obviously much happier today. I don't know where she is today. We're estranged. But it was a good decision. And it was kind of like the last severance of assembly things in my life.
Right.
At that point, I was back to being a super liberal Christian. I was still reading the Bible, but I did not take it literally. And I've actually read the Bible from beginning to end 8 times. It was the 8th time. Yeah, it was the 8th time that I decided for myself, okay, I'm going to read it differently this time. I'm going to question what I'm reading. And so I began reading the passages on slavery. And I'm not making excuses anymore. And I begin reading the passages that are so terrible on the biblical standard for what rape is. And I'm not making excuses for it anymore. Yeah, awful.
Awful. No.
And I begin questioning all these things. I begin seeing contradictions. I'm an accountant, so numbers are kind of my thing. And as I'm going through first,
like these columns do not line up.
They don't line up. So it, First and Second Samuel and First and Second Kings tell the exact same Old Testament stories as First and Second Chronicles do. And when you read them side by side, the numbers don't line up. In this battle, we killed 7,000 people. And in Chronicles, it's 70,000 people. And they can't both be right.
Right, yeah.
And so I really begin questioning the Bible at that point, but I'm still a liberal believer. At that point, I'm in an MBA program at Cal State Hayward, and I'm moving up in my career.
Cal State Hayward?
Yep, that's where I got my MBA. Bachelor's degree at Humboldt State, and then MBA at Cal State Hayward.
Cal State East Bay?
Yeah, Cal State East Bay now. And then at work, I meet my now wife. And the first moment I saw her, I was just intoxicated with her. Just completely, I was professional. I met her at work. I was a good boy. But as I left that job opportunity for the job that I have now, that I still have, I decided as I'm leaving this company, I'm going to ask her if she'll go on a date with me, because now there's no conflict of interest. I'm on my way out the door.
That's good, because when I was skimming over that chapter and I didn't realize you had left that position, and I was like, seems questionable, but yeah. That makes a lot more sense. Sorry.
And she, when I asked her out, she actually asked me, are you comfortable dating a coworker? And that's when I said, well, I'm leaving. I just gave my notice. And so I'm on my way out.
That makes a lot more ethical sense.
Yeah. So we started dating, and from the beginning, the chemistry was amazing. We really enjoyed being around each other. We talked all the time. For the viewers, my wife is of Cambodian descent. She came here as a refugee when she was 1 in 1979. Her family fled the Khmer Rouge killing fields. She, of
And
course, doesn't.
her name is pronounced Shanti or Shantae?
Shanti.
Shanti. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So her maiden name was Thai. That's now her middle name. And we've revisited that, thinking about that. We're like, if we had met where we are now, she probably wouldn't have taken my last name. We would have done something different. But that was where we were. And, so here we are today. So we begin pursuing each other. We're seeing each other
If I
all
ever
the
get
time.
married, they're going to take my last name, just for the record.
I've seen that happen. And that's great. I mean, do what you want to do, right? And then there's other couples where they take neither name and they just retain their, independence.
To be honest, that's what I'd probably do, but I like to joke around.
Yeah. So our relationship develops, and we end up getting married in May of 2013. So this is 10
what's your
years
anniversary?
post-assembly. May the 4th. May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you. My birthday's in May, so I'm always curious about May dates.
Okay. So we get married, and we talk about everything. We plan everything out. We don't slide into decisions. We actively consider decisions before we made them. So we were married in order to try and start a family. And so we started trying in July 2014, July 4th weekend, I remember. We start trying for a baby, and it's not happening. And after a while, we decide to start pursuing fertility treatments, and here's where things are going to get a little more serious. And the fertility treatments become more intensive. The doctors can't see anything wrong with either of us, so they're not sure what the problem is.
Right.
And my wife is having multiple miscarriages, and we're going through that, and it's hell. We're a newlywed couple, and this goes on for 3 or so years. God. And all the while, I'm still questioning my faith. During this period, I discover the atheist community of Austin, and I discover Aaron Ra and Matt Delahunty and Seth Andrews.
What's up, Matt? What's up, Seth?
Yeah, hi guys. So I begin
out of curiosity,
listening to their stuff.
Sorry, what was your wife's or your wife's spiritual sort of beliefs, position, whatever? And I'm going to get up and turn on that light because I am slowly fading. So thanks.
So she was raised Buddhist, being Cambodian. That's the majority religion in Cambodia. So she was raised Buddhist. But during her schooling in the United States, she became involved with various Christian groups, and she ended up becoming a Catholic. During her 20s, she was in a very, very, very long engagement, and that engagement ended up falling through, and she moved back from where she was living to the South Bay, where I met her.
San Jose?
San Jose. So she was Buddhist in upbringing, but Catholic, very, very liberal Catholic when I met her. She wasn't actively attending a church when we met. I was the lead singer of a church in Walnut Creek, a church that is now gone. But I introduced her to that church. We would pray together before meals and do all the things that Christian couples do. But very, very liberally. We weren't by any means fundy at that point. And the other thing that really hit me as we're going through all the growing pains of being a new couple and then newlyweds and then infertility is the racism. I've always been sensitive and sympathetic towards racism, and not towards racism, but towards the victims of it.
Right? Yeah. I'm all gotta go.
Take that quote out of context. But I didn't know what it was like to experience it until I was on my first date with my wife, and we're walking around town in liberal San Jose.
Of course, yeah.
And we're hearing certain comments and seeing looks on faces, not just from white people, but from traditional Asians too. And I was getting really angry during the date, but I'm trying to hide it because I don't want her to think that I'm some angry person. And at some point, my wife says, "Are you okay?" And
There's
I
not really
explained to her
anything.
what I was seeing, and she broke my heart. She said, if you're going to be with me, you
Get
have
used
to
to
get
it.
used to this. It was one of those perspective. I'll never look at the world the same after that. I finally understood what it was like to be the victim of it. And at the same time, I realized if I was a black man living in the deep South, oh my God, how much worse must it be?
Right.
And so I'm having all these revelations, and we still go through it, by the way, when
Yeah.
Trump, went to office, what we experience amped up by an order of
Yeah.
magnitude. And then COVID hit, and the
Ugh.
anti-Asian discrimination, because she's Cambodian. So we've been through the ringer on this. And so
Yeah.
I'm going through a lot of things that, as a white, cis, straight male, I'm loaded with privilege. I've never experienced any of this stuff before. So it was really a wake-up call for me. Even though I'd been sympathetic to
Sure.
victims of this for my whole life, it was, and it still is, shocking to me how it will manifest. A contractor shows up to our house in Elk Grove, California, when we lived there. And he comes in, and the way he looks at my wife when he comes in just was not pleasing to me. And so he comes and he does his work. And as I'm talking to him afterwards, he's talking all about how Trump is going to change this country and he's going to deal with the immigrants. And so we were renting at the time. So the landlord is the one who chooses your contractor.
Yeah.
So I'm biting my tongue, but I wanted to tell him, you fuck right off right now.
Yeah, like fuck off into the center of the sun, bitch.
Exactly. Fuck
like,
you. Fuck the horse you rode in on. Fuck that horse's mother. Just fuck him up. And so that's just a taste of the whole, the stuff that we go through. And
I mean, this is like a very, very, very like reduced, because I'm a white woman. So let me say up front, I have a fuck ton of privilege that other people don't have. But I do remember very clearly someone that I was dating saying something to me along the lines of like, do you not see all of the men that like turn their heads and like look at you when you're walking by? And I said, I can't. Like, I can't allow myself to see that, because if I do, it will be the only thing. It's overwhelming, and it's not a compliment to me. It's not a compliment that men view me as some sort of sexual object, right? And that's as a white woman. That is without any racism, like anything like that. It is purely like, in the eyes of most men, I am like the next notch down. And so it just gets so much worse as you compound and go along. But I remember like saying this to him, like, it was just like, you really don't, not like you really don't get it in a bad way, but it's just like, there's no way that you could comprehend this, because this has not been your lived experience from like the moment you were born, effectively, right? So
and it's one thing, like I said, to be sympathetic to it, and then it's another thing to go through it. And my wife feels the same way you do. If she's walking, she's a very beautiful woman, and I love her to death. But if she's walking the dogs, say, and there is somebody, a contractor on a roof who whistles at her or who looks at her, she feels the same way that you do. She's like, I don't want the attention. No, I don't want it. I don't want to notice it. I do notice it, but I don't want to. I'm not an object. I'm not a painting in a museum. I'm a human.
Why do you feel entitled to like approach me in any way, right? We've been having this conversation on my TikTok, and like the men have lost their marbles, and like I don't really care, but it sort of started off as like, women have the right to exist in public without being interrupted, harassed, or approached by men. They have that right. Leave them alone. And men went off the rails because they were like, well, what if? Like, I don't care about what if, because I have spent a lifetime feeling unsafe, and for very, very valid reasons. So like, just don't do that. I don't care if you don't like that boundary. I don't care if it feels like you are disadvantaged. Don't care. Leave me alone. And like, it's just beyond me, because none of this like catcalling or whistling or whatever has anything to do with a man that actually thinks he has a shot at like getting to know that woman and taking them out and like having a relationship. It is 100% to do with the fact that they view women as sexual objects and they feel entitled
Right.
to let them know.
Yep. The only thing that I've felt comparable to that is being at dinner and noticing attention from, say, a gay man who's looking at me that way, and I'm like,
Sure.
oh, that's how women feel. Okay, now I get it a little bit.
Except there's not the threat of like violence all of the time. Yeah.
Right.
I read something the other day,
right?
Right, that was like, men, don't say anything to women that you wouldn't want your cellmate in prison saying to you.
Right.
And I was like, oh, you know what?
That's good.
Anyway, sorry.
So
sorry.
we're going, we still go through a lot of that stuff, but
I'm sure, yeah.
So our faith is evolving and it's becoming more and more liberal. We're praying together and we're praying desperately for a child. I took a bottle of olive oil and anointed the door frame of the room that we thought would be I know that we.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing near you because
I get
it.
I totally get it. But then, so it all came to a head. I'm thinking about what I believe and why, and we're going through the motions of praying. We had stopped trying to find a church because we didn't want to see anyone in public. We didn't want to be seen. We felt like we were living in hell. We felt like we weren't getting the kind of support we needed from our support network. And just seeing a family with children was heartbreaking for us.
I'm sure, yeah.
So then we go through our final fertility treatment with a specialist in Southern California who was actually on the NIH for a while doing research into fertility at the NIH. This is the kind of specialist it was. And she gets pregnant from the treatment and we are just ecstatic. We're so happy. Oh my God, she's pregnant. The first, because they know you're pregnant, they start doing ultrasounds really early when you're in fertility.
Yeah.
And so at the first one, everything looks great. Second one, great. Third one, great. We reach week 12 and there's no heartbeat and there's no blood flow. And we're told you need to expect another miscarriage. And so we drove hundreds of miles and spent an ungodly sum of money on this treatment, only to be heartbroken again. And then a week passes and the miscarriage doesn't happen. So we go in again and they say, okay, you need a surgical intervention. Your body is not passing the dead fetus. So we need to surgically remove the dead child from your body. And it was, I mean, it was beyond, we're praying and wait, now this has to happen? What the hell? And so I'm in the waiting room and I have a little Bible. It's about the size of my phone. It's a small Bible and I'm reading it and I'm praying. And I'm in the waiting room while our dead child is being surgically removed from my wife's body. There's no one else there. The receptionist has stepped away. And I close my Bible and I look around and I say out loud to no one in particular, if my wife comes through this okay, it will be because of the surgeon and her team, not because of any God. And I put my Bible away and I realized at that point that I was an atheist. I also realized that I had been an atheist for some time, but I had continued believing in belief itself. I had continued going through the motions and doing the things, and my wife had too. A week later, she's sitting with a vacant expression at our dining room table, and I walk up and we cry together. And I tell her, I realized while you were in surgery that I'm an atheist. I just can't believe in a God anymore. And she looks at me and she says, I agree with you. And it turns out she had come to that conclusion before me, but she just hadn't said anything because she knew the part that faith had played in my life throughout, but it was refreshing that both of us came to the conclusion at nearly the same time. And so we turned our feelings into actions, and we took down all of our religious iconography from around the house. We began replacing it all with, just art. I mean, wow, art that's just art. It's not religiously motivated. And we had a choice to make of, do we consider pursuing fertility or do we adopt? And we had enough money to do one or the other, but not both. And then the specialist had done a DNA test on my sperm. It's called a DNA fragmentation test. And for anyone out there who is going through infertility, this test costs about $3,500, but it is so worth it.
I mean, if you're going through infertility, $3,500 is like a drop in the bucket. Am I right?
We spent over $89,000 on fertility treatments. So the sperm DNA fragmentation test, which cost $3,500, revealed that 95% of the DNA in my sperm is abnormal. Wow. I'm the reason that she had been told the whole time, it's almost certainly her.
Of course.
It's her. It's her. It's her. I'm the reason. And upon realizing,
go ahead. No. I was going to say, can I ask how that felt for both of you? Yeah. Sorry.
So on realizing that I was the problem, I was just, oh my God.
How could you not be? Yeah.
Well,
no, I don't mean that in like a jabby way. It's just like, how could anyone feel any differently?
Yeah. And so, there are biological reasons why fertility clinics say that the woman is most likely the reason. It's because if you're 40 and trying to get pregnant, the ova are 40 years old. Yeah, and if you're 40 and you're a man, they're a day old sperm.
Right. No.
But it made the decision for us. There was no way in hell, unless we went with donor sperm, there was no way fertility was going to be successful. Right. And we also realized that even with donor sperm, there's a chance that it doesn't work. And we emotionally, we could not do it anymore.
Yeah, understood.
So we registered for adoption, and that was in, I want to say, August 2016 that we were approved by the adoption agency. We were then living in Elk Grove, California. November 2016, we moved to Roseville, California. We bought a starter house and we moved there. January 2017, we get the phone call from the adoption agency. Hey, a birth couple has chosen you. Can you fly to Kansas to meet your son on January the 17th? That's the day he's going to be born. You're going to be there at the hospital when he's born. And we both were beyond ecstatic and crying and happy and oh my God. And it totally lit everything up. And I called my boss, the CEO of the company, and I said, I know we're in the middle of like annual audit and stuff.
Doesn't matter.
I need time
gotta go. Yeah, gotta go.
And so the wheels of the plane lift off out of Sacramento International, and we're crying. We touch down in Kansas City and we're crying. On the way to the hospital, we stop at a flower shop to buy flowers for the birth parents. And the man from whom we bought flowers was himself adopted. And so we have a conversation with him and we get there, and then we get to meet our son.
Y'all, I have a public image to maintain, please.
And we get to meet our son, Aiden. And his name is my name, Dan. Her maiden name is Thai, Thai. So we took the AI from her maiden name and my first name, and Aiden. And he was born on January 17th, 2017, and we were there. And my wife was in the room with him crying when he had his first bath at the hospital. And we got to bring him home. And life has never been the same. And I like saying, no God required. We are happier today. He's 5.5. He's almost 6 now. And we are happier today than we ever have been. And we're rational. We think about things. Of course, you get emotional. You overreact. But life is so good. And when our son, out of nowhere, comes up to us and says, "I love you, Mommy and Daddy," it just melts us. The whole, 45-minute sleep cycle of newborns was different for us, I think, than for a lot of parents, because when he woke us up, we would look at each other and we would say, we have a son to wake up for. And we never knew if that would happen. And so, today, I'm still at the same job that I'm started when I first met my wife. She's she's back in school. She's finishing her bachelor's degree, and she's rocking a 3.95 GPA, I must say. And our son is in kindergarten, and he loves playing with us and watching movies with us. And life couldn't be better. And when I look back on the path that got me where I am, I'm amazed that the things that happened resulted in where I am today. And my wife says the same thing, because she's got her own story. She's considering writing, her own book. She's got her own story about her own trauma, and the things that she's gone through. And both of us are simply amazed that we are where we are, that we have what we have. We live in a semi-custom home that we finished construction on in 2020, and life just couldn't be better. And looking back, I'm just so thankful that, and I say that, of course, not thankful to anyone but my wife and myself, that here we are. And life couldn't be better, and the next chapter is yet to be written.
I assume we're all just crying now. Yeah. Don't forget, I'll still read you under the boots if you play with me. But yes, I am crying about all of this because that is just, I just love that. I just love that for you and for her and for your son, and just like, I just love it,
Yeah.
And I want to say something that stuck out to me was those buying flowers for the birth parents.
Mhm.
Like I know all, or at least I think all adoptive parents are grateful for the birth parents.
Mhm.
And I've never adopted, I've never been adopted, like none of that. But something I think that gets lost a lot of times in these stories of adoption is like most people do not give up their child
No.
upon having it birthed from their body,
Right.
and then just like go on, and it's like not a big deal, NBD, right? Like they don't think
Mhm.
about it. Like usually that's quite the decision, and it's quite the experience, and there are many 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 feelings that follow. And so I think that like having the people that you're passing this child off that just left your body after 9 months,
Yeah.
like show to you that they are grateful and they appreciate you and they love you, and like that you matter to them is just really important. That's
Yeah.
my thought. I don't know. Again, I've never done any of that, but I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, and we send them pictures and stuff twice a year, so
So
they
is it
get to
sort
see
of
that.
open?
It's semi-open.
Okay.
He's not yet old enough to
Sure.
realize what it means emotionally, but we've
Yeah.
always told him that he's adopted, so he knows. It's
Yeah.
never been a secret. And we send them letters and pictures twice a year. When he knows he's got a brother out there. He's got an older brother.
I love that.
He knows that, and when he's ready, we'll take him to meet his brother or fly his brother here, however that works. So all of that stuff is on the table. It's just a question of the details and when.
Right. Oh God, I'm gonna cry. Yeah. So like, I personally, I have grown up with a dad who I've always known as my stepdad, um, but I just call him dad, and like that's
Hmm.
fine. Um, but like I grew up with a cousin who was also adopted, not in the same sense, like had the same mom that she grew up with, lived with her, but mom married a guy and that was her stepdad, but she was never told that was her stepdad, always told it was her dad, didn't find out until she was like 16 trying to get her driver's license that like this was her stepdad. And like I just find it incredibly, I find the way that we create and define and understand family
Mhm.
to just be incredibly powerful. Um, Especially if we're doing it honestly and openly, and like
Right.
we're all just trying to give um the love and care that we have, right?
Right.
So anyway,
To
I'm
love
super
and to
happy for
be
all of
loved.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna stop because otherwise I'm gonna keep crying. Uh, so maybe we can get to some of the questions because
Okay.
otherwise I'm just gonna be a big sobbing mess. Um, First of all, Scott, thank you for the protein shake. Yes, my legs are very sore. I've been trying to get back into the gym more regularly, as y'all have seen. So shout out to the protein king. Next up, let's see. We have Aaron Colson. This was supposed to be while Dan was in. Did he ever get pushback from anyone that made him think something was wrong?
Constantly. But I didn't think something was wrong. I thought they were wrong.
Mm.
One of the things about being so deep in and we're seeing this again today with the MAGA people. The citizens of Magistan cannot be told they're wrong. And I was very much that person where I believed so strongly that what I thought was right, you could not tell me I was wrong. You just couldn't, unless you were in the cult. And then you could tell me I was wrong. But for all those outside influences, my parents, extended family, teachers, etc., that there was nothing anyone could tell me. And it for me, it took something shaking the fundamentals of what I believed before I was willing to question. Other
Right.
people may be different, but that's what it took for me.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's see here. Oh, here we are. Heathen Queen. How much stress, guilt, anxiety did Dan experience during his time in the cult? What
So
measurement are we using?
yeah, so not growing up, but living in the Sierra Nevada for 4 years, summer thunderstorms were one of my favorite things. I loved watching lightning arc from the clouds down to the mountains. At one point in the assembly, uh, thunderstorms would form over the mountains to the east of the coast on a regular basis. Winter, summer, whatever, they would just form over there. And I remember being outside at night and watching the clouds light up with the lightning and feeling a sense of existential dread. God could snuff me out right now. And I'm a wicked wretch of a sinner and I would deserve it. And so
Stinky
was
plebe.
guilt, stress, and anxiety a part of my life? Oh, yes. Yes. At any moment, I believed, although it says he loves me, there's grace, etc. If he were to snuff me out, it would be justified. He could do it, and I would deserve it. And so, yes, stress, guilt, anxiety was a thing all the time.
So, I guess last call here. If you have questions and you want to ask them, please do. Because we're going to wrap up relatively soon, but I'll give everyone the last chance. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you dealt with, managed, processed the trauma that comes with leaving not only religion, but like a fundamentalist version of religion?
Yeah. So I think it's important. All of us now are familiar with the term being triggered. But I think that one of the most important things to realize when you're triggered by something is what's doing it. Often it's your subconscious trying to tell you something. Your
It's the point
subconscious
that needs
mind,
healing, but
yeah,
yes.
your subconscious mind has made a connection that you need to recognize what that was. So something that happened in my own life. I was working with someone some years ago who every time I spoke to this person, I was bothered. It didn't matter if the conversation was positive or negative. I was always bothered by it, always, and I couldn't figure it out. So
It's
one day,
annoying.
after a very positive phone call one time, it was a business associate. After a very positive phone call one time, I was so annoyed. I got a notepad and I wrote down everything we talked about. Okay, nothing's negative. It was all good. So I'm thinking about it, and then I wrote down the tone that we used to
Oof.
talk about it. Okay, okay, okay. And then I wrote down a few other notes about the tone And as I was looking at it, I realized, oh my God, his cadence, the way he emotes, his inflection, it's just like George Giftakis. He talks, he emotes, the way he talks, everything sounds so much like him. My
Oh, yeah.
mind had made that connection and it was bothered by that. But consciously, I had no idea what was going on. So I think one of the most important things to do as you're in recovery is to take that big step back, especially if something really triggers you, and really make notes and think about it and try and figure out why. Because that person was an important person for me to have a good business relationship with. So I had to have a good relationship. I can't just cancel them out of my life. They have to be there. So once I understood what was driving my reaction, it was not an issue anymore. I haven't felt that way since. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Vaguely Agnostic says, thank you so much. The fundy mind benders are a huge thing to heal from. Thanks, HQ. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so something that I've noticed going along in my own healing from both religious trauma and just like childhood trauma is this reframing that has to take place. And not only reframing, but like, I'm trying to think of how to say it. Like, there has to be this massive perspective shift because I've had this same thing happen, like you just explained, but it wasn't me and the leader of my church. It was like me and my mom. And I was like, I cannot stand this person, but nothing they're saying is like inherently bad or wrong. So like, what's going on here? And then I realized like, oh, it's just it's my mom. All right, great. Love that for me personally. No. Of course it's Sierra Nevada. Please. Have you not listened to this entire thing? All right. So I feel it seems like that's all the questions. Speak now or forever hold your peace outside of what beer it is, because we just showed you. So I want to give the last couple of minutes first to say thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me and for spending and for sending me your book with an excellent inscription. Again, if you don't own it, it is called A Walk Through the Wilderness by Dan Conger. You can read all about his journey from before he was in the cult, while he was in the cult, and after he was in the cult in more detail here. It's on Amazon. I assume it's other places, but I'll let him tell you about that. So, like, where can people find you, Dan? How can they support you? Where can they find your book? Like, all of the things, all of it.
Well, so the book is on Amazon. Right now, it hasn't been picked up by any other sellers. So if you read it and if you like it, a positive review would be very much appreciated. That would be very supportive. I don't have a YouTube channel per se. I do, but I don't post a lot to it. My wife and I have a plan to start regular posting about once a week, but we're not doing that yet. So that is forthcoming. So right now, in light of support and whatnot, it's mainly about the book and spreading the word. And then once we get YouTube going, that'll be out there too. But you know, we published this. I talked with my wife a lot about it before we put it out there, because obviously it's not just my life on the line here. It's hers too. It's her story as well after she met me. And so, you know, it's very much a joint effort, and any support in light of just making sure people are aware, because we poured our hearts into this, would be very appreciated. And like I said, she may tell her story at some point when she's ready.
No rush, but I hope that she does.
Well, and we've heard that from other people too. Yeah. And she's definitely thinking about it. But like I said, she's finishing her bachelor's degree and doing some other things right now.
No, I get it. That's why I said no rush, because like first, as a woman, I feel like it's important. I don't know how to say this. So I majored in economics when I was in college, and there was a study that came out that was like men and women taking an econ 101 class, and like men would get a C on their test, and they'd be like, I am a goddamn genius. I am the next like I am the next fucking Thomas Piketty. And then women would get a B plus, and they'd be like, I'm not cut out for this. Like, I'm like, it's not for me. So like I always want to say to women, like, and I don't know your wife at all. It's just me, my sort of take on whenever I speak to women. Have the confidence of some random white man on the internet. No, 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 like put
Don't
it out
have that
there.
confidence.
No, 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 like
That's
but
narcissism.
yeah, like your story is important. More people want to hear it and will be helped by it than you know. That doesn't mean it has to happen right now because, like, again, she's finishing her degree, and I double majored when I was in undergrad, so I fully get what it feels like to try and like do that and work. I didn't even have a kid, so like whatever. But like it sounds like her story is really important, and I do hope that she tells it, and I will be eagerly awaiting the release so I can buy it.
Well, and that's why we told this story, is we wanted to help people that A, had been through what I had been through, and B, are in a similar fertility situation.
Right.
We've
Yeah.
been there and we know what it's like, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just it's tough to get there.
It might be complicated.
Yeah.
All right. So you may have said this, I can't remember. Where can people find you? Do you want to be found?
Yeah, just right now, I'm on Twitter at Dan Conger author. Right now, I post a little bit. I don't know what I'm going to do given the changes that Mr. Musk is making.
God.
There's no way in hell I'm paying $8 for anything. But so I don't know what I'm going to do there. But I'm on Twitter at Dan Conger author. We're going to start our YouTube channel. There is one out there under my name, but it doesn't have a lot on it. And then the book at Amazon. I'm trying to get other retailers to pick it up because we want our story to help people. But we'll see. That's a longer road.
Yeah. Read it, or I guess buy it, read it, give it a review. I feel like that's probably the best that we as an audience can do. Follow him on Twitter if he decides to migrate off of Twitter.
We'll see.
Follow him there. I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, for now, just follow him there. And hopefully y'all's story can help other people. And on that note, because my dogs are assholes, I'm going to say thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the book. Thank you for your time. I greatly appreciate it. And I know my audience does as well. If you have not done it yet, like, subscribe, hit like, do all the things. I don't know, send me cookies, whatever. Or sign up for my Patreon, whatever you want to do. I love you all so much. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being here. Please support Dan. Dan, thank you so much. And on that note, I'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Thank you.